You're listening to Cytology 101. I'm your host, Sydney Banks. Join me as we dive into work-life balance, mental health, and building personal and professional relationships. So grab your favorite glass of wine or cocktail as we all try to balance our shit. Hi everyone, and welcome to Cytology 101. Today I am joined by an incredible superwoman. She is a licensed psychotherapist, motivational speaker, radio show host, life coach, and fitness fanatic. She is a mom to 5 and a wife to 1. She is passionate about helping women obtain that elusive work-life self-relationship balance by cultivating healthy minds and body. After 15 years in traditional psychotherapy practice, Dr. Zoe Shaw jumped off the couch and now helps women using a different methodology with a mix of virtual therapy, coaching services, and programs designed specifically for women trying to have it all, who sometimes struggle in the superwoman game. Dr. Zoe Shaw is the author of the Ask Dr. Shaw column in the Grits and Grace Project Women's Magazine. She has been published in Recovery Today magazine and is a frequent contributor to Your Tango. She writes about helping women redefine their strength. You can find her in the media on Instagram at Dr. Zoe Shaw and in most social places at the handle Dr. Zoe Shaw. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. And wow, that bio just sums up everything that Cytology is. And I'm so excited to have you today.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, that bio. Wow, that took a minute.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty impressive. I mean, one of the things that we were just talking about before we started recording is, I work for this huge company.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the things that we struggle with, that work-life balance.
Yes.
And I get to speak to so many people all over the world, but the issue is still the same. How in the world do we balance it all?
Mm-hmm.
So who better else to talk to us about it than Dr. Zoe Shaw, right?
Right.
I listened to your show. I absolutely love the show. And one of my favorites is you start your show off with your wins and your fails. And
I
so with that tradition, I wanted to see if it was okay if we did that today.
Absolutely. So I start my show off with a superwoman win and a superwoman fail. The reason why I do that is because I know that it's so very important for us to honor our wins, but also honor our fails. A lot of people, I actually had someone on my podcast that refused to give me a fail, because she said she doesn't believe in failure, right?
Wow.
And it was just very interesting, because the reality is we do make mistakes. And if we try to pretend like we don't, we're hurting ourselves.
Right.
We can learn from our mistakes. We should learn from our mistakes. But we first have to be willing to admit them and honor them just like we do our wins. And so I do. I talk about real. I'll tell you a real one today. Maybe it's a little TMI, but I'm going to do it.
I love
so
it.
First, my win, and I actually talked about this on my podcast today. I just today signed a book contract. So I'm so excited. I'm going to be writing a book about self-care. It's going to be basically a year of self-care, mostly for women, but men will definitely include you there. So I'm excited. That's my win, is that I got this book deal.
Awesome.
So my fail, I ran out of deodorant. So the deal is that it actually happens. But the deal is that I don't like the chemically laden deodorants. And so I tend to not buy the regular store ones. And I know they have some more natural ones, but I'm allergic to baking soda. So I order my deodorant. And so I somehow messed up and I didn't order it on time. I ran out of deodorant and I decided to come to my office today with no deodorant. Thankfully, this is a podcast. You can't smell me. I don't smell, but but reality is we make mistakes. And that is my fail for this week, is that I ran out of deodorant. It happens.
That's awesome. And it just shows that you're human, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the part that I absolutely love. And I am guilty of doing that too. And that's why I now have deodorant everywhere.
I actually do have one in my office, but I'm allergic to that one. So it is what it is. Yeah. But in a pinch, right?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to share mine too. I wanted to kind of share that spirit. And
Good.
again, I love that whole concept because it is true. It's okay to honor those fails because you learn for them. And
Mhm.
so my superwoman win today is I was sitting in my office and my team, they're just outside my office. We are a small team and it has been a long road to
Mhm.
finding the perfect team. We work so closely together where we have to communicate all the time. We travel together. Sometimes we stay in the same hotel room. And it has
Mm.
been a real struggle to
Mhm.
find a good team. And today I was typing on my computer and I had this feeling of just joy. And it was because I realized I was in a happy place.
Wow.
My team was talking. I was yelling at them from my office and we're talking about just different subjects, but while still getting shit done, while still getting our work done.
Mhm.
And for a long time, it took me a while to find that rock star team. So my win today is I realized that I have finally discovered how I got to that point. And I wrote it down. I wrote it down, those steps. You know what? What I looked for in this team was
Mm.
someone that compensated my weaknesses. But
Mhm.
also, I looked for team members when I hired them who fit our culture because I realized that was a big thing. And
Mhm.
so I wrote that down as my win because I felt like that was a struggle for so long. And today I finally have that weight off my shoulders. So that's
That
my
is
win.
awesome. Congratulations. And I love that you wrote down your formula.
Mhm.
So you learned from that too, from that struggle, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you're able to do, and that's the whole deal when it comes to honoring your fails, is that you're able to look at what are our weaknesses and
Hmm.
how can we strengthen that, right? If you're not
Right.
willing to look at your weaknesses, you can't grow. So I love
Right.
that. Congratulations.
Thank you. And I took, again, I've been listening to your podcast. So I took some of those notes down. I was like, oh man, I'm going to jot that down because clearly I did something right.
Mhm.
Well, opposite, my fail today was I took my dog to the vet this morning and I realized I have a time management issue.
Mm.
I did not check my schedule, didn't realize that I had morning meeting, dog appointment, coaching call, had to get to work. And so I was running late the entire day because I confirmed this appointment, had my fiance put it on my schedule, and didn't look at anything else. And it threw my day completely off. Like I didn't get caught up until I sat down for this podcast.
Mm. Yes.
So time management is my fill, and I really need to just make sure that I'm keeping track of my schedule and making sure that my fiance know, hey, check with me first before you just go put something on the schedule because I may not look at it. So that's my
Very
fill today.
good. Mhm.
So I just have some questions for you, and my first one is: at a young age, I know that you wanted to be a psychotherapist. You wanted to kind of follow in your mom's footsteps. Can you tell me what steps did you take to get to where you are today?
So, I think one of the things that I have done well is that I've recognized the concept of delayed gratification. I learned it early. I'm not sure exactly how I learned it, but I think it's so important for young people to learn it
Mhm.
because it's easy to have a goal, right? But
Right.
then when there's steps to get to that goal, and some of those steps feel useless, some of those steps feel unnecessary, and the journey can feel sometimes too long and people can drop off. I think one of the things that I knew is this is what I want.
Mhm.
I want to be a psychologist. I know there's steps that I have to do to get there. And whether I liked it or not, I did it. I kind of looked at a lot of my education, especially those first 2 years of undergrad
Yeah.
and, classes I had to take in graduate school that I absolutely hated. I just looked at it as hoops that I needed to jump through in order to get what I wanted. I think when we try to apply too much meaning to some things that are really hoops that we have to get through, we can get a little bit lost. But
Mhm.
I think that's the best way I can kind of uh, uh, characterize how I did it. Now, of course, I did the traditional steps. I went to undergrad, and then I went straight and got my master's and straight and got my doctorate. Along the way, in my doctorate program, I had 2 children. It made it a little difficult. It
Yeah.
took me 6 years to get my doctorate because I had 2 babies in the process. But in some ways it was a determination to get it done.
Awesome. You did mention, I was reading an article that, your mom was a psychologist as well.
She
Um,
actually wasn't a psychologist, but she majored in psychology in
oh,
her
major.
undergrad. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
With your mom majoring in that and kind of picking up on some of those techniques that I'm pretty sure that tactics that she would use,
Mhm. Mhm.
did you find yourself at a young age kind of using that throughout life to even get you to this point because of your mom's background in education?
I would think so. My mom was a people watcher and she always talked about people's motivations and,
Yeah,
why they did the things they did. And I ended up becoming the same. I
yeah,
love people. They're just endlessly interesting to me. I'm just so curious about people and why they do what they do and how they became who they are. So I would say probably because I had that psychology bend from very early,
mm,
I'm sure I used plenty of tactics.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love people watching too. And
Mhm.
again, my job is talking to people all the
Mm.
time. So it's really interesting to know people's background story.
Mhm.
How,
Mhm.
like you said, how did they get to where they are? Because it does help you understand who they are as a person. But
Right.
also, it helps you communicate. I feel, for me personally, it helps
Mhm.
me communicate better. If I know who you are, where you came from, and know your why, then it just helps me, whatever goal or relationship that we are creating, whether it's professional or personal, then I
Mhm.
can help contribute to that.
Right.
So I absolutely love that statement there. Now, one of the things that I did want to ask, and I know this is kind of intimate and personal, but in a article with Voyage LA, you talked about your journey and your story when you were in school. Like you mentioned that you had two kids. You also got married really young. Do you mind sharing just a few details about that and kind of the struggles that you went through?
Yeah, I don't remember what I shared in Voyage LA. um, so I did. I got married at 19 and I've now been married 25 years. You can do that
That's
math.
awesome.
And yeah, I did have two children in the process of my grad school.
Mhm.
I don't remember if I shared this in Voyage LA. I also had a child when I was in high school.
Yes, you did.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had a teenage pregnancy and I placed my daughter for adoption when I was 16 years old. And that
Mhm.
in many ways has shaped my life.
Yeah,
Um, and I then went on to meet my husband and we got married. I got married very early, like I said, at 19.
mhm.
And we had a difficult early marriage. There was a lot of dysfunction in our marriage, and we've had to do a lot of growing and learning and really evolving and changing in order to make our marriage a healthy one. And that was
Yeah,
a difficult road. But yes, I did have two children in my grad program. I have 5 children altogether. But having a child and placing her for adoption definitely shaped a lot of my I think I think it created a lot of shame early on in my life, which I know now are tools that I can use to help as I work with other people.
mm,
It also forced me to develop some strength to really counteract that shame,
mhm.
which is also, like I said, another tool that I know that I use to help women who are struggling with their own issues of guilt, shame, self-esteem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I asked that because I remember I had an abortion at a really
Mm.
young age.
Mhm.
And I read that article and I was like, that had to be so tough. And I applaud you for even, having the child and giving the child the opportunity to even have a life where I felt like I was a coward because I didn't. And I was scared. I was alone. And, I didn't have that support. I didn't, I looked out 5, 10 years and I was like, what kind of life can I give this child
Mhm.
if I decide to go through with this? And I felt as if some of those struggles that I personally struggled with as a child, I was going to reflect that on my child.
Mm.
And I
Mhm.
barely made it out alive. So why would I even put my kid through that?
Right.
And I just applaud you for sharing that. And I really wanted to share that with our listeners because there could be someone feeling guilty or ashamed
Mhm.
for it. And like you said, you take that and you channel it. And I now have a beautiful 6-year-old son.
Aw.
Um, and he's my life. And I don't regret it at all. I no
Mhm.
longer have that feeling of ashamed or being judged. And I am more open to say, hey, I actually did have an
Mhm.
abortion. And
Mhm.
it's because I learned from it. And now, like you mentioned, you took it and you shaped it into something else where you can help others. And that's what I would like to do. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it and applaud you for sharing.
Well, thank you, and you're very welcome. And I love working with women who have abortion stories because it's very similar to mine. Because all of that shame and guilt is the same. Yes, I did keep my daughter long enough to place her for adoption, but the placing is in many ways very similar to um, the feelings that many women who have abortions feel about how they rejected that child,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I love to work with women as they work through that guilt story. And I just had a woman yesterday I was in session with, and she's struggling with that, and she wasn't able to have children after her initial abortion. So there's even that whole additional level of self,
yeah,
hate and anger and guilt.
yeah.
So these stories need to be told, and I'm writing a memoir right now. It's not the one that I'm getting published right now because the publishing company wanted me to write a different book, but I'm writing a memoir that I will be shopping to other agents
Yeah.
about my story, because I think it's so important that we share,
Yeah.
because we aren't the only ones who have these experiences, right?
Right, right, yeah. And I think when you talk about being young and especially young in your marriage
Mm,
and growing from it, me and my fiance, we started off in our relationship really young. And you mentioned, not being able, thank God I have a miracle kid. But after
mm,
my son, I was diagnosed with lupus.
oh,
And I had the worst pregnancy. It kept being rejected. He kept being rejected. And
mm-hmm,
my body just didn't want to do it, and I fought
mm-hmm,
for him. And I think when after I had him, I did slip into a depression because I'm like, well, now I can't have any more, and I would have had two if I would have
mm,
just.
yes,
So
yes.
it is a struggle, and anyone out there that is listening, definitely know that you're not alone. And you know people are here that's gone through that, and know that you have support. And like I said, I'd be really excited to read that memoir once it comes out for sure. So, switching gears a little bit, in early in your career, you were working with racially identity for African Americans. Tell me
Mm-hmm.
more about that. I didn't know that was a thing until I read your story. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, I started studying it for a couple of reasons. I was actually looking at African Americans who were adopted by white parents,
Mm,
and the adoption piece, obviously, that's close to my heart because of my history. But
mhm,
I was actually raised in a predominant, more than predominantly, basically all white environment,
mhm,
and I know that that had an effect on me in terms of my psyche, my self esteem, my ability to develop a sense of who I am and my racial identity. And so those were issues that I was really interested in studying. And there are a lot of people, Dr. Daryl Rose, who I worked with when I was doing my research, and he does a lot of studying about like racial identity and congruence and what happens when people don't have congruence with their racial identity. So for me, it was more studying. I was able to see some population in that area. I didn't stick with it just because I started to branch out into general practice. But
mhm.
it's still an issue that's very close to my heart.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said that because I feel like we're vibing right now,
Mm.
and maybe that's why I reached out to you because I'm like this story's really hit home for me. But I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood,
Mhm.
and not to go into too many detail, but my upbringing wasn't always the best and
Mhm.
in good situations. And I felt like I did deal with a lot of identity crisis.
Mhm.
But the curveball for me was I grew up all the way until I was a teenager in a predominantly white neighborhood. and
Mm-hmm.
then moved to a predominantly Black neighborhood.
Wow.
It was such a culture shock for me.
Yes.
I was picked on, I was teased by the way that I talk, by the way that I look, and
Mm-hmm.
it was horrific.
Mm-hmm.
And me and my best friends are best friends today because we protected each other from bullies. And
Wow.
so when I read that, I was like, whoa, let me read more about this because maybe I do struggle with some form of identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've been told that a couple of times, like, oh, she acts white or she's this. And it's like, no, it's who I am. And
Yes.
why do
Yes.
I have to defend myself with the things that I like? I'm
Exactly.
sorry that my culture doesn't fit what you think that I should be.
Mm-hmm.
And then icing on the cake, I am marrying a white man. So it kind of validated everyone who what they were
Right.
saying. And then I held on to it. And
Mm-hmm.
once I was able to release that, I found my own closure. I felt,
Mm-hmm.
you know what, you're who you are, and it's
Right.
okay to be who you are. It's okay that you're not the typical African American female. It's okay that
Mm-hmm.
you're not dating an African American man.
Mm-hmm.
You are who you are, and as long as you're happy and love and doing all of the right things, you will be okay.
And
So
you will find your people.
yes,
Yes.
I will. And
Yes.
I have.
You do.
I feel like I have. I'm still working
Mm-hmm.
on it, but I feel like I have. And so, like I said, when I read that article or that portion of it, I read more into it and dug into myself really
Mm-hmm.
and kind of self-diagnose myself.
Mm-hmm.
um, I thought that was really interesting. Do you find that you see families that deal with that same issue? Like maybe the families that are biracial. Have you ever currently dealt with those issues?
Oh yes, absolutely. I've had kids and parents biracial in my practice, and
Mhm.
identity is definitely an issue. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel as if with what's all going on right now in 2020,
Mhm.
it's so hard. And I was talking to my neighbor, and she's Hispanic, and
Mhm.
she called me and she was like, what do I say to my son? I'm like, girl, I don't know. I don't know how you're supposed to explain this. And I guess she called me because obviously I'm African American and
Right.
my son is, people are gonna identify him as an African American man.
Mhm.
They're best friends. Her son and my son are best friends. And she's like, I want to talk to him about this because Chase is his best friend. And what do I say to him? The only thing you can tell your son is to respect others. I had no idea what to say to her. And for me, I still haven't had the conversation with my son because I don't know what to say. And so, my question is, if with those families who are in a biracial relationship, my son doesn't see color, how do we even talk to our kids about this?
Well, what I would say is your son does see color because all children see color. By the time children are 6 months old, they can differentiate colors. And by the time they are 3 years old, they can start sorting things through colors. So, color is beautiful, and that's what you teach your son. I think a lot of people, well, it's just a very uncomfortable topic to talk about because of the deep wounds that we have in society.
Mhm.
If it weren't for those deep wounds, color wouldn't matter. But color does matter because of the deep wounds. And what we need to teach our kids is not to not see color. We
Mhm.
want to teach our kids that color is beautiful. And so it's okay to identify
I
people
like
by
that.
their skin color. It's okay to talk about it. It's okay to talk about the difference in your tone versus your son's tone versus your fiance's tone, right?
Mhm.
And
Right.
talk to them about why that is in the melanin in their skin. Um, one of the ways that I talk to my daughter about it is Lucretia Berry, she's the CEO of Brownicity, and she did a TED talk, which I thought was wonderful. And she was talking about basically race and talking to your kids about racism. And she was
Mhm.
telling a story about a friend of hers who's a nanny, who's a Black woman,
Mhm.
and she is in charge of a white child. And the white child asked her, "Why is your skin so much darker than mine?" And she said, "Well, because I drink more chocolate milk." Right?
Right.
And then she was talking about another woman who told her grandchild that Black people have color because God left them in the oven too long and they got burnt. And so all of these crazy stories that we tell our children, right? Because we're so uncomfortable with talking about the real issues.
Mm-hmm.
But in our silence, we speak louder than anything else. And so often we think that by being silent, we are creating colorblind children. We are not, because society tells them loud and clear about what they deem the value is. And so we have to talk to our children about it.
Yeah.
And so I talked to my daughter about that whole chocolate milk thing, and I laughed with her. I said, "Can you believe that?" And I said, "Do you know why we have different color skins?" And she's like, "No." And so I shared that story with her about melanin, and it's because of the melanin in our skin. And people who have deep, dark, beautiful skin, they're, they have more melanin in their skin, and people who have, very pale skin, they have less. And so just sharing with my daughter the understanding of the differences, even through that little silly story. So it's more of a positive thing than a negative thing. But we want to start talking to our children very early about it. And then the reality is that some people don't understand the experience of other people. Some people are fearful of what they don't know. And some people are just not very nice, right? And it's okay to share with our kids that there are hateful people in the world. Just like we talk to them about stranger danger, we should talk to them the same about racism. And we have our deep wounds about it, and so it's more painful for us to talk about it. Our kids don't have those deep wounds. This isn't painful for them. We experience it and we project that onto our kids, and so we're fearful to talk to them about it.
I think that there's two things. One, and thank you for putting me in my place. I love it. I was so caught up in the way that I felt about race because of the way that I grew up and having those two different lifestyles that I don't know how to have that conversation with my son. The second thing that I feel like is a roadblock for me is he too young for me to even talk about racism? And I was listening to Carrie Washington, and she was on Jimmy Fallon, and I love the way that she put it. Talk about it pre Jim Crow. Talk about all the great things that we did before slavery. That's how you bring it up. And it took to me, and I was like, you know what? That is something that's awesome, because Black History Month has turned into all about slavery, and don't want to put that past anything. We do want to teach our kids, but it was more than just that. And so when I heard that, and that was actually just a couple of weeks ago, actually, when she did that interview, and I was like, man, maybe I should take note of that and start doing my own research and put it together and have Chase sit down and let's talk about this and put my own insecurities aside for a moment and talk to my son about color and where we came from, because he's half white, half Black. And so my next roadblock that I have is he has a whole different side of him that I have no idea about. So now it's up to dad to sit down, and me and my fiance, we have to sit down with him and we have to talk to him together. And so again, we're early in our really, well, not early in our relationship. Justin and I have been together for 9 years, but but this is a new thing for us, and there's always something new. And at this point, for us, we have to sit down and come to the same page of how do we want to talk about this? How do we want to address racism, color? Because again, Chase will say, "Oh, I'm golden, and Dad's light golden, and Mom's brown."
There you
And
go.
I'm like, okay, well, if that's what you see, then that's what you see. Totally fine. But you have to respect others that don't look the same way. And I just have to figure out how to have that difficult conversation with them.
Well, I don't think you need to look at it as we're going to sit down and have a talk, right? It doesn't have to be that. This should be just an everyday part of his life. A wonderful way to start introducing this is through books. So my daughter, she's now 14. I have a 7-year-old too right now, but my 14-year-old daughter, her favorite book was about Ruby Bridges. And we used to read the book about Ruby Bridges when
Yeah.
she used to have to go to the school and she had to walk through that group of angry mob protesters who
Mm,
hated her because she was Black. And she would cheer when we got to that point where Ruby stood up to the crowd.
yeah.
And the book explains very clearly what was going on in that time period, why all the other white parents took their kids out of school. And
Mhm.
it's a very encouraging and redemptive book. And so she can identify with that strong girl who went
Yeah.
against the wrongness of the world, right?
You're right.
And I read books like a book your son might like is The Boy Who Changed the World. And that one is a really great book that talks about, oh, I'm blanking on his name now. He studied the peanut. I can't remember his name right now, but there's really great books
Mhm.
that share with your kids about the history of our country, about the history of the world, and their ancestors that can start that conversation. And so you can read the book to them and then ask them what they think about it. You can talk about it in your daily life. It doesn't have to be, let's sit down and have the talk. It should
Yeah.
be an ongoing conversation. And then I'm sure there must be books about your son's heritage.
Mhm.
I don't know what the background of your fiance is, but talking to him about those things and reading books about that so he can get a really good clear picture of his heritage.
Awesome. I like that. Definitely educating because
Hmm.
like you mentioned just a moment ago, what you don't know, people fear. And so if
Right.
I educate him on that, then that can definitely change that mindset. And even myself,
Hmm.
educating myself on
And when you
that.
talked about teaching your child to respect, I don't know that they really understand what that means. And so, like for my 7-year-old daughter, the other day we were just on the track working out and she said something. She was talking about somebody and was said something like, "Isn't that so ridiculous?" Or I don't remember what it was. But I saw that as an opportunity to teach her about acceptance, to teach her that her viewpoint is not the same as other people's viewpoint. And so,
Mhm.
and this had nothing to do with race, what she was talking about, but it all applies. And I told her, I said, that was their experience. And
Yeah.
just because you haven't had the experience doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, doesn't mean that
Mhm.
it wasn't their experience. So when somebody tells you something, just because you haven't experienced it, it's not okay to assume that it's not real.
Right.
And so just that viewpoint helps her to start recognizing, oh, wait, my experience isn't the same as everybody else's. I
Yeah.
need to accept and recognize that. And that is really the basis of what creates racism, especially systemic racism in this country, is not having that viewpoint.
Yeah, I actually like that, and I will definitely have to kind of change, how I am talking to Chase. Again, parenting is just a whole
Tough.
book. It's a book, and
Yes,
or and you have to just kind of write it down and learn from it, and
you do.
um, again, I'm just learning all of these things and really pulling from mentors and
Hmm.
inspirational people. Like I said, I've been reading a lot on some of the things that you've done, and even like I said, Kerry Washington, and just figuring out how is everyone else balancing all of this. How are they having these conversations? Is it really as that hard? Is it that difficult to have these conversations? And I like how you put that, educate our kids,
Hmm.
have these lessons, these moments where, oh, you know what, this is actually one of those times that I can actually teach them, hey, this
Hmm.
is, look at it from a different perspective. So I really do like that. And thank you for sharing those tips. Um, with all what's going on with the Black Lives Matter, the riots, and now us being in quarantine, and some states actually going back into quarantine, have you seen that it's been tough for your patients to kind of get through this? A rise in anxiety, and what about yourself? How are you dealing with all of this?
Yes. I not just me, I know all therapists and anybody in the mental health field right now, I talked about this when the quarantine first started, is that COVID is going to have a number of casualties, not just from the actual disease itself, but from the quarantine. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, it's very true.
Mhm.
We humans weren't meant to live this way, and unfortunately, it is creating a big mental health crisis in our country. I am inundated, and I I'm very sad that I can't take all of the clients that I wish I could, but I don't have that capacity. Um, and the clients that I do have, their level of, stress is just like way high.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm experiencing it, but so is every other therapist out
Mhm.
there experiencing it. For myself, it's so great that I'm writing this book about self-care,
Mhm.
because what I do is I guard my mental health and my psyche very carefully. I'm very aware that that I get to choose everything that I let into my mind. To mostly I get to choose, and I have a gate.
Mhm.
Because I know that I have to protect my psyche so that I can be there not just for my family but for my clients. I did not watch the George Floyd video. I purposefully knew that there was nothing good that could come for me mentally to watch it. I didn't need to watch it to know what happened. I know what
Yeah.
goes on. We all know what goes on. I
Right.
think it's great that it got out there because other people needed to see it.
Right.
I myself did not need to. And so I guarded myself knowing that it would only do damage.
I wish I would have done that. Guard, myself from that.
Hmm.
I actually literally had a panic attack,
Yes.
and it was, of course, we've just talked about having that conversation with my son,
Hmm.
all that was going on, and of course, starting the podcast now back on social media. A while back, I cut out all social media
Hmm.
and wasn't on there because I felt I have a history of depression and anxiety. And
Hmm.
I felt myself kind of slipping into that. And you know what?
Yes.
I need to remove these toxic things from my life and not pay attention to that.
Right.
And so when COVID first happened, I was actually in Nebraska. That's where my fiance is from. And what's was awesome about it is they're farmers. So we were out in the middle of
Oh, that's
nowhere.
great.
It was,
Outside.
yeah, so it was just outside, birds chirping, nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And then I came back to Phoenix and I felt like all hell had broke loose. I'm like, what
Hmm.
is happening? It's not that serious, guys. And then I log in, I'm looking at the news, and I'm like, oh my God.
Yes.
So then, we're dealing with that. We're quarantined, and my job did not slow down. It still picked up. The only difference is I'm no longer traveling. We actually grew in our company. And,
Mm.
and I know that that was kind of more of what led to that. But then George Floyd happened, and I'm back on social media. I'm seeing all this negativity, all
Mhm.
these negative things, and I do want to educate myself on what's going on around the world, but I also have, like you said, protect my mental health.
Right.
And I didn't. And I end up one day like driving to work, and I saw the National Guard. It was like 18 trucks on the highway, and girl, I literally just freaked out. Just
Mhm.
freaked out, and it was the worst moment I had in a long time, and I wish I would have done that. So I was telling my sister, I opened up to her about it, and she was like, "Why not remove those people from your Facebook or unfollow those people?" You know,
Or a mute. You can
yeah,
mute them
or
for a while.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what she said. She was like, "You need to do those things." I was like, "This is why I don't be on here. This is all these things.
Yeah.
I don't want to see it." And now I know that I can actually go in and I can clean all of that up. I don't
Mm.
have to suffer through that, and I can protect my mental health. And that was a really good learning experience for me to know
Mhm.
that I have that. And I really encourage some of my friends to do the same thing, because I was doing wellness checks and just calling, "Hey, how you doing?" And
Mhm.
then they would flood me with all of these things, and
Oh.
I felt it again, but the difference was I already had that panic attack, and I stopped them and I said, "Hey, I have already gone through and had my oh shit moment,
Mhm.
so let's talk about other things than that.
Yes.
If you cannot call me and not talk about COVID or the riots, then I don't want to talk to you. And I'm so sorry. I still love you though,
Mhm.
but I don't want to talk about it." And I'm so happy that I got to that point, and that you mentioned that. And it's okay to remove those toxic things from your life.
Yes. Yes. Not just okay, but necessary. It's
Yes.
self-care. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure we're going to see some of that in your book.
Yeah.
Give us some tactics that we can use, that we can make sure that we're self-caring and taking care of ourselves. In a recent blog, you did talk about the multi-generational transition process, and I had no idea what that is. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I can. I don't know what the context was or what blog I wrote that in. But we pass down things in our family.
Mm-hmm.
We pass down beliefs, we pass down ideas, values, we pass down dysfunction,
Mm-hmm.
and it has a ripple effect, right, in our families. And it's so important to recognize and know what those multi-generational processes are in your particular family. Every family has them,
Mm-hmm.
because often it's one of those things that we feel and we experience, and it's the lens through which we see the world, and we're not even aware of it. And so I ask clients to really start to identify and look at, and sometimes we can do this through doing kind of like a little family tree, and really look at issues that they know exist in their family, because they affect our life, they affect our world and the way that we see everything and experience life. So that's what it is. I don't remember the context that I talked about it in a blog.
So when I was actually reading it, and so sorry that just kind of threw that
It's
question
okay.
out there. Um, Again, I was reading it in the context of what I was struggling with.
Mm.
Me passing down my history of depression,
Yes.
my history
Oh.
of anxiety, and that is kind of what you were talking about in a lump
Mm-hmm.
sum of
Mm-hmm.
us passing down those bad things to our children.
And even
And
like the uncomfortableness about race, right? And our
right.
own racial bias, our own racial trauma. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So with us being, potentially passing those things down to our children, I was wondering and just trying to write down some things on my own of different things that I can do. But I found it really tough because, like I just shared with you, I did have that panic attack, with
Mm-hmm.
the whole everything going on and the fear of actually talking to my son about it. So I decided to write down a few things of how I can get past that so that my son doesn't see it. What I'm struggling with is he's around me 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
So there
Mm-hmm.
is no freedom. So he's going to pick up on everything that I'm giving off. If I'm sad, he's sad. If I'm running around cursing like a sailor, he's going to curse like a sailor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to just kind of figure out, or maybe some tactics that you may be able to throw out there for listeners who don't want to pass those negative things off. What are some things that you can how can you redirect that? I guess is my question.
Well, the first thing is what I said, is that you have to be clear about what they are.
Mm,
So, for instance, if you are afraid of spiders, or you're afraid of heights, or you just have a lot of anxiety,
mhm,
often we will pass that on to our children by being hyper vigilant, like don't touch that and you could get hurt. And
mhm,
we feel like we're trying to protect our child, but we're really just instilling anxiety into our own children, right? And
mhm,
so if we can recognize those things in ourselves, then what we can do is stop them. And when we
mhm,
see our child doing that thing that causes us anxiety, we can purposefully do the opposite. We can encourage our child to do the
yeah,
things that we are scared for them to do. Dale Thomas, I love her. I had her on my podcast twice now, and she was talking about her extreme fear and how she worked so hard to
mhm.
not instill that in her son. And she said, I think I went way overboard, because her son's a NASCAR driver.
Oh,
She's like, he went from here. She's like, he took it, away. And we often will do that too. We swing the pendulum too far sometimes. But it's really being intentional and recognizing how it's the things we don't say to our children, and it's
Mhm,
the subtle things we say, because those multi-generational um, things don't generally get passed down by us sitting down and talking to our child and saying,
mhm,
listen, you should be depressed about this, and you should have anxiety about this, and you should have a hang up about this. We never do that. We pass it down in the little things that we say.
yeah,
And so you naming them for yourself, you working on doing the opposite of what your kind of natural inclination is, and then
mhm.
also going ahead and naming them for your own children. It's okay to talk to your children about things you see in your family that you know are not healthy and you don't want to continue. My father did that with his mother, who was an alcoholic.
Mhm.
He talked about her alcoholism and he talked about the fact that he wanted to choose to be different and why he doesn't drink and why that's important. And he did break the cycle. None of us are alcoholics. But if you think about what happens generally in alcoholic families is people don't talk about it,
Yes.
and it just continues to happen generation after generation. And
Yep.
so we're often fearful of talking about that thing that
Mhm.
scares us so much, but it's actually the very thing that you should be talking about.
Wow, that's powerful for me because I feel as if, and of course, I'm still learning these things on my own and trying to figure my own shit out. Um, my family, we come from a long line of drug abuse, domestic abuse.
Mm,
And if we didn't follow that, what happened behind closed doors, stay behind closed doors, I do personally feel as if life would have turned out a lot different for me and my sisters, which I'm
mm,
blessed for where I am today.
mm-hmm,
Um, but for some reason, because I witnessed those things, because I witnessed all the horrific things that happened, in our
mm-hmm,
household, I vow that it wouldn't happen to me.
mm,
But now I deal with other things, emotional things. But I did. I said I don't want those things to happen. And now it kind of had me thinking that you said that, I should talk to my son about, hey, you know what? I grew up in this. And although he doesn't get that from me or his dad,
right.
well, what if he sees it somewhere else and thinks that it's okay? So
Mm-hmm,
you just completely triggered something else in my mind of, you know what, you probably should address those things and know that
mm-hmm,
that's not okay.
mm-hmm,
And before you even mentioned that, in my mind, I'm like, well, it doesn't happen in our house. He'll never experience it. And I never have to discuss it again. But you know what? Maybe that's not true.
mm-hmm.
So thank you for bringing that to light. I am definitely going to have to share that with some of my family members.
You're welcome.
And I know that I asked this question, but what age would you say, like, for those traumatic things that I experienced as a
Mm,
child? Like I said, my son is 6, and what age do you start talking to your kids about those things? Do I talk to him now and then he all of a sudden manifested and I caused some form of issues? Or is it, you know what, it's okay, mommy experienced this, and that those are things that shouldn't happen.
mm-hmm. You talk to your children on an age appropriate basis.
Mhm.
So, like I said, there should never be a big talk. It can be
Mhm.
little tiny things. If
Mhm.
something happens in the house or you see something on TV that you know he saw, it's
Mhm.
okay to just start addressing it. Like, when, mommy was little, maybe when mommy was your age, I, you know, saw a lot of fighting in my house. And that
Mhm.
was really unhealthy. And so I'm really happy that you don't have to have that in our house, but maybe you
Mhm.
saw that over there. And I want to talk to you about that. It's
Yeah.
just little things. There is no one right age. And when we talk about race versus racial trauma or racism, like I said, race should be something that should be talked about from 0. Your
Mhm.
child can see color from 0, 3 months or 6 months old. Racism should be talked about on an age appropriate basis about mean kids and not mean kids. About,
Mhm.
like I said, understanding that everybody is different and accepting everybody for who they are. And it just builds from there. And when you talk about your own traumatic issues, it should be little things. And then later, as he gets older and can understand more, you explain
Mhm.
it in a deeper way. I don't know if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that does make sense. It
Yeah.
does. It makes a ton of sense. And I think that's, again, that was one of my struggles. But I also have a couple people that I've spoken to where they don't know when's the right time. And my fear with that is we get in this portion of our lives where we don't know the right time to talk to our kids, that we never talk to our kids about it. And then now they're adults, they're off in the world and have no idea what the heck is going on. Mom, why did you never tell me that? And so I asked that question just because I know that there's probably listeners out there who may have
Hmm.
experienced something, and we want to protect our kids. We want to
Right.
protect them from the dangers, but it's okay and to talk to them about it.
Well, you actually protect them by educating them, by talking to them about it. That's how you protect them. And
Right.
there's a fallacy, and it's not even just about children. There's a fallacy that if we talk about something, we are
Mhm.
somehow going to create it or manifest it. And that is actually the opposite. It happens with people who are suicidal. If you
Mhm.
see someone who's super depressed and maybe they might be talking about suicide, people tend to not talk to them about it because they think, well, if I ask them if they want to kill themselves, I might give them that idea.
Oh,
Really?
wow. Yeah.
You think they couldn't come up with that themselves? No,
Right.
talking to somebody about
Yeah.
suicide who might be
Mhm.
suicidal actually reduces their chances of
Wow.
committing suicide. But we have that kind of idea in our psyche for some reason that if we talk about something, we're going to manifest it.
Mhm.
No, you won't. If you talk to your kids about drugs, you are reducing the chance of them utilizing drugs. If you
Right.
talk to them about sex, you are reducing the chances of them having sex too early. If you
Right.
talk to them about these things, you actually create the opposite. It's the silence that
Mhm.
increases their chances.
Right. And that's what everything that we're going through right now as a community,
Right.
the silence is what's the problem. And if
Yes.
we actually just start talking about it and we're open about it, then we wouldn't be where we are today, or
Right.
less of it at least.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that we all have to kind of step up and own up. And we may not want to do it.
Mhm.
It may be uncomfortable, but we have to. And we have to
Mhm.
put our own insecurities aside because we are the adults and
Right.
we have to be able to teach our children. We also have to be able to lead and follow. I
Mhm.
feel as if sometimes we get in this thing where we're not listening to what others are telling us. So
Mhm.
someone may be struggling with something, or maybe someone did have an encounter, a racial encounter, and tried to talk to someone about it, and they just brushed it off. Well,
Mm.
wait, no, am I crazy? Is it me? Like, what's happening
Right.
here? So we have to be open and be able to talk about those things and know that again that it's okay. I had a friend who I just mentioned a moment ago talking about my panic attack. And
Mhm.
um, I have a friend who just keeps sending me all of these facts on
Mm.
Black Lives Matter. And, you know, I end up disconnecting myself from that friend and really close friend. And I just really felt as if I want to listen to her. I want to let her know that I do understand her side and what she's saying.
Mhm.
I never said that I don't believe in Black Lives Matter because I do believe in it. I do believe in police brutality. I also don't believe that all white people are bad. And her
Sure.
take is white people and all these things.
Mm.
And I'm like, come on, man. I have a white fiance. My son father is white. I have a
Yes.
whole nother side that I don't see that from. And the crazy part about it when I explained it to her is my perspective is a little bit different. I know that there's racism out there. I've experienced it. But my perspective is now different because I took Justin around my family. He got shit for the color
Mm.
of his skin.
Mm.
Then I, in return, went to his side of family and was open arms, completely different experience.
Mm. Mhm.
And I'm like, you know what? And then also, again, I mentioned early in the podcast, I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood.
Right.
Never got teased, never got bullied. Moved
Mm.
over to a African American neighborhood,
Mm.
and that's my experience.
Right.
And I told her I believe in the movement. I don't believe and all white people are racist.
Mhm.
And there's nothing that you can do that's going to change my mind. And for me, having that conversation with her, I decided to close myself off
Mhm.
after I said that. And I got flooded with all of this information and how I could potentially be brainwashed and all of these things. And how in the world, as a friend that you've been friends with this person for so long, how do you let this dictate your friendship? How do you Are we going to let this end our friendship? And should I have like some conversation with her of, hey, this is how I feel. um I think that, some of the things that you're saying is hurting me personally. And I don't think we should let the outside world really affect our friendship. And I guess my question to you is for some of those who had to have those conversations, because you mentioned in one of your podcasts that you had to have a tough conversation with a friend about
Hmm.
Black Lives Matter. Um, is it worth saving that friendship, or is it kind of, did it bring to light that maybe you don't need that person in your life?
I think each situation is different. And reality is that when it comes to our people in our life, we
Mhm.
should have like, an inner circle. And those are kind of our ride or dies. They're with us and we we know they completely have our back at all times, right? And
Mhm.
then we have outer layers and outer layers and outer layers. The most outer layer is acquaintance,
Mhm.
or maybe even colleague. And so I don't believe in burning bridges with people unless that person is just so very toxic that they
Mhm.
need to be completely cut out. But that should be something very rare. But
Right.
I do firmly believe in making sure that you have people in their appropriate layers when it
Mhm.
comes to your people.
Right.
And so sometimes people who are in our innermost layer have to move outside. And sometimes people on the outside will move
Mm.
inside. And that's kind of a season of our life thing.
Yeah.
And there's, a few, really should only have a few in there who stay in there forever.
Yeah.
I don't think that this is something that should end a friendship,
Mhm.
but it might be something that makes her designated to an outer layer for right now. I think that it's so important that we speak our truth in
Mhm.
relationships, which is hard to do. But when we speak our truth, then the most health has the opportunity to be there. And if it means that the relationship needs to change a little bit for now, then so be it. But
Yeah.
it's more important that we speak our truth. I don't know if that
No,
answered your
that
question.
does. That's really good. I I I just asked that because I'm wondering how many people has had this conversation with all that's going on, How many relationships have been ruined or,
Hmm.
hey, I'm going to cut this person off and in my mind I'm thinking, well, you know what? Maybe we just don't talk about this anymore. Maybe we just say, you know
Right.
what? This is that subject that is off limits that
Hmm.
we're not going to see eye to eye on and maybe that's okay. And then I got some feedback from another friend, and she's like, I think you should cut her out of your life. It's okay to have different opinions. I
It
just don't think
is.
that, given my mental state, I
Hmm.
just don't want that negativity. And I don't want to
Right.
have to choose of what side and cause rift in my own household because to be honest, there's nothing wrong with what's going on in my
Hmm.
household. And I don't have to talk to my fiance about this because clearly he's not racist.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I just wondered like what tips, that you could give. And I think that was really great.
Hmm.
I don't think you should ruin relationships over that.
Right. And I think it's important to find common ground.
Mhm.
And even when you talk to her, I think it's great to say, you know what, we need to kind of agree not to talk about this. I
Mhm.
agree with you on these points, and I'm glad that we have common ground here. There's some other points that I just don't, and I think it's probably more damaging to our relationship to go back and forth on this.
Mhm.
So I would like to propose that we as friends, because I
Yeah.
love you, don't talk about it for right now.
Yeah. And I definitely have to have that conversation for sure.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
hopefully we both respect that. And I
Yeah.
think that's the biggest thing is respecting those boundaries and
Hmm.
setting limits. You actually mentioned that in another one of your podcasts is setting
Mhm.
limits. And I think that that is important on to do that in certain friendships. So that we're coming to the end of our episode here. And of course, my number one question that I ask every single guest. We're all about work-life balance here at
Mm.
Sidology.
Mhm.
And you are just over the place. You have all these different projects going on, these amazing things. You're a blogger, you're a writer, you're really into fitness. How do you balance all of this and be a mom, a wife, and keep your sanity?
Yes. Well, it's not a perfect balance. So that's the first thing. That's why I honor my wins and my fails, because it's not a perfect balance. I, didn't have my deodorant. So there's that. But I do it honestly. it's a juggling act, and I do it by really focusing on my priorities. And it's really easy to get caught up sometimes in the minutia of things and to focus on things that we shouldn't be focusing on. So for me, I really focus on what are my greatest priorities, and that is what I invest my time into, especially when it comes to family. And so I can tell you there have been, interesting periods of my life when my kids were really little. There was an actual period in my life where I decided we are not going to do dishes because it's taking up too much time in our life. We're buying all paper products. We did recycle, but it was just, I was working full time and doing all these things in homeschooling, and family time was more important than arguing over somebody about doing dishes, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so it was only maybe a year or so when my littles were really little, and we just cut it all out. So it sounds like, well, that's kind of crazy, but honestly, the dishes don't mean anything in my life.
Right.
Yeah. It's a nice thing to have, but if you get really crystal clear about what's most important, then it's easier to balance it than when you're focusing on things that aren't as important.
Wow, you just spoke a whole lot of truth. And I know me, I've gone through that whole battle of the dishes and working. There have been times where I have been gone, maybe home. This is the best way to put it. I travel so much that I may be home for 2 days and then I'm gone again. And I will come home to a kitchen full of dishes. Like, did you guys eat everything in the house? And for me, like you just mentioned, all right, well, I just Amazon us a whole thing of paper plates. And this is what we're going to use.
Yes, yes.
And here, you have these little microwavable things, and you can just throw them out so that I don't have to come home to having to clean up this kitchen after being gone for so long. And thank goodness, we figured out that too, because I end up hiring someone to come when I'm away to clean the house because
smart, yes.
obviously they're boys and there's stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
And so that's funny that you mentioned that, finding what's priority and starting out, that was one of my struggles. And Justin and I would fight all the time about it, hey, you can at least help me with this. But then I realized that's not that important, because what's important is that I am gone all the time. But when I come back, I'm annoyed because there's dishes in the sink.
Exactly. You're resentful and bitter, and then it affects everything in your family.
Yes, it really does. So I thank you for making me feel like I'm not a crazy person.
Nope. We
And
all have those same
overcoming
struggles.
those.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I know that you have a couple of projects coming up. So you're writing a book
I
and
am.
you're writing a memoir.
I am.
Do you know when that's going to kind of be out?
So I know for sure because of my deadlines. The book will be out at the end of this year, so end of December, and it's a book for self-care, a year's worth of self-care for women and some men. So yeah, look out for that at the end of the year. It should be available pretty much everywhere. And my memoir, I don't know when it's going to come out. I've put it on the shelf a little bit while I finish this book, and I'll pick it back up probably about September when this book is finished and it's off to the editor.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to read both. I'm definitely going to, obviously, I'm following you. You can tell that I'm kind of going through everything. I'm a huge fan here.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to read it. I'm pretty sure it's going to be great. And I thank you so much for being on the show. Guys, we have been joined with Dr. Zoe Shaw. And again, you can find her on social media at Dr. Zoe Shaw, and or you can find her anywhere in the media with the handle Dr. Shaw. So make sure that you guys follow her. You also have a podcast.
I do. I have a podcast. It's called The Dr. Zoe Show, Redefining Your Superwoman. You can find it on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, all the places. It's on YouTube as well. And you can find it there and subscribe.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I truly appreciate it.
And that wraps up this week's episode, Difficult Conversations with Dr. Zoe Shaw. Make sure to click the subscribe button below and leave us a review. Tell us what you think about this week's episode. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and check out Dr. Zoe Shaw at Dr. Zoe Shaw. Until next time, let's all try to balance our shit.